Hello everyone, it is me once again, the Book and Movie Guy, and today I'm returning to my short series covering some of the Dark Tower novels written by Stephen King. And today I'm going to be focusing on the third novel in the series,
The Wastelands.
And the writing trait that I want to focus on from this novel is one that is very important to fantasy writers and fantasy readers, and that trait is, of course, world building. Now, just full disclosure, this is not going to be like an excessive deep dive into world building and the traits that are necessary to make it effective. There's lots of videos about that already. In fact, other YouTubers are better at it than I am covering that topic. Specifically, Hello Future Me has lots of great videos on world building and books that do it well, books that do it poorly, and how to do it. He's a great fantasy YouTuber, so go check out Hello Future Me if you haven't already. So in my video on The Gunslinger, I really focused a lot on ambiguity in that novel and how the ambiguity Stephen King employs really adds to and elevates the story. Not just that, but actually helps tell the story. In this book, The Wastelands, there is still ambiguity about how certain things happen, but this is a much bigger book, a lot more is explained, and this novel is much more thorough, and the setting is a lot more fleshed out than it is in The Gunslinger. But in this book especially, I think that extra length is being used to great advantage to differentiate this story from The Gunslinger and the previous, and to keep the series feeling fresh, and also answer some questions that we had about the world. Specifically, we get to see the state Midworld is actually in. Instead of just seeing small towns and random shacks, we get to see an actual city. So we get not only a sense of what Midworld is now, but a sense of what it used to be. The City of Lud is a great setting that I'm going to talk about later in this video, but getting to see the state of ruin it's in really shows how far the decay and destruction of Midworld has progressed. This novel also tells us explicitly what the Dark Tower is and what it's used for. The previous two touch on it, but I feel like this is the first time we really get it explained to us what the tower is, what it does, and why Roland wants to protect it. I believe this novel also introduces the beams. I don't think they're mentioned prior to this one, and we get some glimpses at the people who guard it, or not people, but the creatures, like Shardik and the turtle and such. And I think the inclusion of the beams really elevates the story because it gives the characters a clear path to follow, like in The Wizard of Oz, which is a big part of the next book. And having a clear path to follow helps us really feel like we're progressing on our quest. They're really trying to go places in this book, and in later books it sort of feels like they're just spinning their wheels. And I appreciate that in this novel. They're really just dedicating all their time into getting somewhere. Additionally, instead of just feeling sad and cold and empty like The Gunslinger, the world building in this novel gives some humanity to the plight of Roland and Midworld. The characters at River Crossing are a great example of why Roland and the other gunslingers should be motivated to complete this quest, and why we as the reader should actually even care about that quest. If everyone in Roland's world is already dead, then there's really not a reason for him to reach his tower. However, by showing us that there are still good, kind people like the people of River's Crossing, we get more of a sense that, yeah, there's something out there worth saving. This is also a great contrast to Lud, which is full of debauchery and evil, and there's some nice glimpses in those scenes and passages set in Lud that shows things were not always this way, and that this is once a city of great technology and culture and understanding, and again, it makes the plight of Midworld a little bit more tragic. Other things that make this book feel more sad and worn down are the use of machinery and robots. The Gunslinger had some machinery, like just basic Western machinery and iconography, but this book actually adds some new special creatures and robots to the lore, like Shardik the robot, who is like the most advanced form of technology ever, but he's falling apart and he's got worms in his brain and he tries to kill Eddie and the others. That's some good stuff. And also the scene when Roland commands Eddie to shoot the three little robots they find in the clearing, I think is one of the saddest scenes in the series, just because there are these small, helpless creatures that don't really have a purpose anymore, and it's Roland and the Gunslinger's job to basically put them out of their misery. Another aspect of world building that this novel pulls off better than any of the others are the villains. In The Wastelands, I think Stephen King creates the best villains he's created anywhere in his writing. Specifically, Blaine the Mono. I think Blaine the Mono is a great villain and a great representation of everything that is going on and that they are trying to fight. I said a similar thing about Jack Morton in the previous video, but Blaine the Mono represents something different and something specific to Midworld. That said, the sequences set in Lud are some of Stephen King's best writing, not only in the series, but anywhere. It's scary, it's bizarre, and it's funny, which is pretty much the perfect trifecta of what good Stephen King should be. And villains like Blaine the Mono or the TikTok Man or Gasher are villains who can only exist in Lud, and that's another great use of setting and world building to create villainy and conflict for the characters. Because even though Blaine is evil, I think that there's a lot of sadness in his story, and there's a lot of sadness in the story of Lud. Lud is also a great foil to the city of New York. Whenever Roland goes to New York later in the series, he remarks how similar it is to Lud, with it even having a suspension bridge similar to that leading into Lud, the George Washington Bridge. And I think that's really important because, as I discussed in the last videos, the idea that our world is moving on just like Roland's did, despite all the technology, is an important part of these books and an important part of the next one specifically. And I think that Lud also really represents what the goal of people like Flag and the Crimson King is. Part of their goal is like death and destruction, yes, but also they're just there to make things decay. They're not necessarily there to be the one that swings the sword. They just want to set the stage for the person who swings the sword, which I think is a very interesting concept for a villain, specifically Flag, and that's why I've always loved him as a character. And I think that Lud as a city and a location is a great representation of that. They could have just wiped out and destroyed the city itself, but instead, through John Farson and other characters and conflicts, the Crimson King and Flag just created the scenarios that allow Lud to exist, rather than putting Lud itself in the state that it is. Which to me is a lot more frightening, because you never know where the seeds of evil are being sown, and it's very disconcerting to consider that all around you there might be little things slowly going wrong that are culminating towards an ultimate collapse. I also think that just beyond his concept, the personality of Blaine is again frightening, interesting, and funny, and the entire riddling sequence is great. Another interesting thing about Blaine and Patricia is, I don't know if other people have observed this or if this is even a correct observation, but they remind me a lot of Hamlet and Ophelia, and the fact that Patricia is a piece of machinery who just kills herself by drowning herself, similar to Ophelia in Hamlet. But similar to Hamlet, Blaine is also insane, depending on your reading of Hamlet. Yet he's also a genius. And I think it's interesting that Stephen King has these two characters, Blaine and Patricia, who could essentially be like a couple, similar to Hamlet or Ophelia. And one of them drowns themselves because they can't connect to their insane partner. Good job, Stephen King. Gotta get those literary illusions in there. It's good stuff. Beyond just basic world building, I also wanted to touch a little bit on the characters in this book and how much more rich they are than in previous entries. In The Gunslinger, Jake is not really a character so much as he's a plot device, but he's really expanded on in this novel in ways that I think work great for him, Roland, Eddie, and Susanna. Characters can be grown really well through world building, and in this novel that is definitely the case. I think the quartet is the strongest and most vibrant it ever is in this book, and a large part of that is due not just to Jake, but also to Oy. I'm not afraid to admit that Oy is probably my favorite character. All jokes aside though, the setting and the world building in this novel really help force the characters together, and I think the best friendships in fiction are the ones where you can't quite decide who is the better friend. If you're trying to write friends, it should always feel like somebody is owing somebody something, and that it's kind of like a mutual owing because they're both contributing so much to that relationship. For instance, Oy nearly falls off the bridge and Jake rescues him, and this is paid back later twice when Oy saves Jake in this very novel. Every character is also given a role and a purpose to serve. For instance, when they are in the city of Lud, Roland and Oy are going after Jake, while Eddie and Susanna are going to find and confront Blaine. However, when they're trying to get Jake in the midworld, it is Eddie who carves the key, and when they're actually trying to unlock or wake up Blaine, it is Susanna who is able to figure out the puzzle involving prime numbers. So everyone in the quartet is forced to do something because of the world and the setting around them, and I think that's really good, because it's easy in a team story to have characters that just don't contribute anything, or just sort of there to be there. This is a big problem in a lot of the X-Men movies and even some of like the Avengers movies. So anytime you have an ensemble or a team up, it's important to give everybody something to do. Another good example of this would be like in Lord of the Rings, where every character, mostly because they're different like species or races, has a specific thing that they're good at or can do. And it's important to make sure that you don't portray that in a gimmicky way. It's important to have characters whose skills are tied to the personalities, arcs, and growth, and this novel does that very well. For instance, Eddie being able to carve the key is a result and a manifestation of and a counter to his childhood with Henry, when Henry would make fun of him for pursuing his hobbies and things that he enjoyed, such as whittling. Here in Midworld, Eddie is free to do that, and it serves an important purpose to helping him and Jake and the others, as well as progressing the story at hand. Another thing I want to point out, just because it tickled me a little bit, and I'm sure that people have recognized this, I just haven't seen it anywhere, is a comparison between this novel, The Wastelands, and Season 4 of Stranger Things. Now, I don't know if this is on purpose, but I'm going to assume that it is, because we all know the Duffer Brothers are huge Stephen King fans. But while I was at the gym the other day doing some seated rows and listening to Zombies by the Cranberries, I realized that Jake in this novel is very similar to the character of Max in Season 4 of Stranger Things. Both are depressed, sad, and angry, disconnected from their parents, and feel like they're being torn between two worlds before they come into contact with an evil demon monster that wants to kill them, only to be sucked through a portal and re-embraced by their families, and finding a new purpose and an understanding of life as a result. Both, of course, are about the same age as well, and there's an important story and metaphor about depression and anxiety there for both characters. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Good job, Duffer Brothers. Again, I like seeing things I recognize, so I can be like Leonardo DiCaprio in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood and go, oh. Okay, with all that said, I want to start doing a small mini segment at the end of these Dark Tower videos where I talk about a couple songs that I think connect to these books, and not just songs that are like in the books or that fit the vibe or that Stephen King would like, but songs that for some reason I personally connect to and also feel fit the stories of the books. So some of these might be songs you know and like, some of them might be totally new songs. I hope that it's a bit of both. So the first song that I want to talk about for this novel is Daddy Lessons by Beyonce, which might seem like an odd choice, but it's basically a song about a father teaching his daughter the ways of the gun and the ways of the cowboy, essentially, and how to protect people weaker than you, like your family or children, and being prepared for trouble whenever it might come to town. Which reminds me a lot of Roland and Susanna, as there were a lot of training sessions in this novel, and a lot of Susanna getting good with the gun, and Roland being like her father figure, and not only Susanna, but also Jake and Eddie as well. And it was just a kind of a concept that I liked and that I thought was fun, and it just fits the good plucky vibe that the first part of this novel sort of has. So Daddy Lessons by Beyonce is a song that I think fits this novel. Another song that I think fits, I will admit, is one of my favorite songs, and that is Civilian by Y Oak. But I think Civilian fits the series very tonally, but the lyrics apply a bit as well. The idea of this kind of like failure and decay and the very folky nature of the piece, I think, works really well for the journey in this novel. And some of the lyrics, I think, apply pretty well as well. That reminds me a lot of Jake in this novel, his search for Roland and having no idea who he is or what he is and kind of lying to himself about what's going on. I know that the actual song is probably about a romantic relationship of some kind, but I think that the lyrics can apply to the relationship between Jake and Roland as well, even though that is, of course, not romantic. Okay, this next one is another song I really like, and I think the song also applies to Wizard and Glass, but it fits best here, and that song is I Know the End by Phoebe Bridgers. Specifically in this book, again, I think this is a song that relates really well to Jake, in that it captures sort of like a depression, a lack of purpose, just kind of like a general sadness and apathy that is very similar to Jake's state in this novel. Jake is a lot of times more neurotic and crazed because he doesn't remember what is real and what isn't, but I think the idea of a teenage disconnect is really present both in this song and in this story, so that's why I picked I Know the End by Phoebe Bridgers. And some of the lyrics that I thought specifically worked well were the first verse or so. Man, I hate this part. 3 clicks and I'm home is reference to The Wizard of Oz, which is a big part of the next book, but also of Jake feeling stuck between two worlds and not wanting to interact with anyone and just wanting to hide in his room. His writings and his musings about Roland. The idea that you had to go, Roland letting him go in The Gunslinger. I don't know, I think it works. So yeah, if you have any songs that you think fit this book, let me know in the comments, because I'm always interested to see what people are connecting to. So those are some of my thoughts on The Wastelands and what I think makes this novel work, as well as what I think sets it apart from some of the others in the series. The world building is fleshed out, the characters are fleshed out, the setting adds a lot to the story, and the villains are manifestations of the conflict at hand and could only exist in this specific world or setting. I think this is Stephen King at his most creative, it's Stephen King at his most uncomfortable, and this is definitely a runner-up for my favorite in the series. And it's kind of a tie between this and Wizard and Glass, and depending on my mood, the final novel as well, which of course we'll be talking about eventually. So, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you didn't, that's okay. Thank you, and I'll see you again next time.